Welcome back to Raised by Giants live discussion. Good to see everyone. Welcome everyone in the chat and any moderators and channel members out there, and to anyone that's listening to the replay. Thanks for joining us. And if you're listening on the audio only podcast version of the show, welcome. And if you're watching on YouTube or X, be sure to follow the podcast version of the show. You can set it to where the shows are automatically downloaded upon release. So follow the show on Apple Podcast, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts, so you never miss a show. A Clockwork Shining is also available on Tubi. Anywhere you can download the Tubi app, you can now watch my documentary, A Clockwork Shining, on Tubi. So if you've already seen it, please watch it again on Tubi. If you've seen it on Apple TV or Amazon, just throw it on again on Tubi, because it's going to help support future projects. It's pinned to the top of the chat and is also in the description of this video. So without further ado, our guest today, he's been employed by the FBI. He is an inactive reserve officer as well as an Air Force special agent, and then worked as a counterterrorism consultant for 6 years following military service. He is an author, researcher, writer, and investigator, and he's in my documentary, A Clockwork Shining, on Apple TV Plus, Amazon Prime, and Tubi. Walter Bosley, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Hey, Ryder, good to be back. I always enjoy being here and talking about these things that we like to get into.
Ooh, and speaking of things, we've had a couple of conversations kind of planning out what we're going to talk about here today. And first off, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. And as you know, I'm writing my next documentary. It's going to be on the DIA Army Intelligence Stargate program. And how I kind of stumbled upon the topic of what we're going to be discussing here today is I was going back and reading through all the documents, to make sure that everything, that my memory was accurate and that I could write everything down to get the script all ironed out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled across this paragraph within the Sunstreak document, which Sunstreak was the former name of the Stargate program. It had many different names. They relabeled it and renamed it several times. And this document says from the Sunstreak that only one scientific claim of detection of remote viewing is known, which is Chinese scientists claim to have detected remote viewing during their experiments with children. Okay. And then this line underneath it, which looks like that it was tried to be redacted here. It looks like someone tried to mark this out here. I had Trey Hudson on, and we kind of talked about this as well before. And this was his work. This is what he did for the DoD, is he redacted a bunch of documents and approved them for release whenever they've been declassified. He was in the classifications department, right? Mm-hmm. And it says under here, it says work to replicate these experiments, however, is ongoing at SRI. And I thought that was a very interesting statement. Okay, what does that exactly mean? Does that mean that SRI is trying to duplicate the experiments that the Chinese were doing on children? That's what it seems like whenever you read the document here, is that they're making it seem like that SRI is trying to duplicate the experiments that the Chinese are doing on children to assess if they have psychic abilities. So then I was like, okay, I need to look into this a little bit further. So then I started doing more research on it, and I stumbled across a bunch of TikTok videos, which, whatever about TikTok, it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of solid information on there. So I'm scrolling through TikTok, and I'm looking at these people that are talking about the GATE programs within public school. Okay. And I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. Okay. And then that's when I called you up. I had no idea really about any of this, but I wanted to verify it, because it's very difficult to actually verify if there were psychic experiments going on with children within school, because I haven't found any documentation on it. And I was like, well, Walter will probably know about this. You know, he worked for the FBI. He's a Air Force former special investigator for the Air Force. He probably knows. And lo and behold, uh, you knew a lot about these programs that are going on in public schools, and you were involved. So let's start there.
Well, there were a lot of kids involved in this in multiple states. What I know about my experience with it was it started in first grade. As far as I know, it might have started in kindergarten. But I remember in first grade being pulled out of class by a guy in a suit, which seems to be a common thing. But then, back then people wore suits more. I guess this is in the late 60s. And, I would be told to read just a list of words, and I would read them, and he'd smile and nod and say, okay, thank you, Walter, and send me back in. I guess I pronounced them properly, enunciated correctly. And I do recall earphone tests. I don't recall. Some people recall what was said. If I heard it, it might heard, the recording again. It might jog my memory. But I do remember the headphone tests in first grade. I remember this going on, being pulled out of class and being told to read a list of words and state them, more than once. This went on more than once. And on my first day of second grade, I then was informed, my second day of second grade, because the first day pulled out of the room again. And on the second day, when I showed up for school, I was informed, and my mom was informed, that I was being moved up into the second, third grade combination class, kind of an advanced course. And these kinds of things were pulled out of the class by the guy in the suit, read this, thank you very much, went on through second grade and through third grade. And then in fourth grade, what was interesting was in third grade, I think it was, I won the school spelling bee. I beat everyone in my own grade and the fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. So that's kind of an interesting note there. But in fourth grade, my pediatrician prescribed this yellow fluid. It was as thick as Pepto-Bismol, and I was told, my parents told me, was that I had some type of asthmatic condition. Okay. And for 1 year only, I had to take a little cup of this daily. And I just accepted that it was for some asthmatic condition in childhood. But then when I started hearing of people in this program, which I'll describe more what I know about the program, they had to drink a weird thick liquid as well. And so it was talking with you that I thought, well, I'll be darned. I wonder if the asthmatic condition was just the excuse, were they working with doctors? I don't know. It could have been very easy for them to work with doctors. But what I and my sisters were in was what California in the late 60s, early 70s called MGM, mentally gifted minds. And other states called this different things. And it was just a way, my understanding, what I know about it from my parents and from the perspective of the school, is that it was just a way for them to gauge, I guess, aptitudes and maybe IQ or again, primarily, what's your aptitude for this, for that, what's your learning, level, that kind of thing. And in first grade, they use these phonics systems, right, in the U.S. to teach reading or advance your reading level, to teach you, to advance your language skills. And the one I was in was this program called ITA. It was this weird alphabet that, help the students understand the sounds of letters, short vowel, long vowel, that kind of thing. But it was a weird alphabet, and I was only exposed to this in first grade, the whole class was. And while I was, in first grade under IT, and then second grade in the combined advanced course, and then I went on to a third grade class, I was still being pulled out of the room and asked to read these words. Now, after fourth grade, it stopped because we moved back. Well, we moved to West Virginia. When I say back to West Virginia, I've talked about it before. Just a few months after I was born, because my dad's from there, we moved to West Virginia, and I spent, I think, the first 2 or 3 years of my life, better part of 3 years, in West Virginia, Mothman country to be exact, mineral wells, while the Mothman stuff was going on, interestingly enough. Then we returned to California, and it was after the return to California that I was exposed to this program we're talking about and describing. And then after I finished fourth grade, my dad got a hankering to move back to his hometown again. And so we moved to West Virginia for 2 years, and I didn't have any of these sessions with, being pulled out of class, wasn't taking the liquid anymore. And never again did that happen. But in my case, while I was in high school, my uncle, who was my mentor, started showing up more. And then his mentorship of me began as I was finishing college. And most people who know my story know that that's about when my career was getting kicked off. And in that early mentorship, my uncle, who had retired with 44 years in the U.S. intelligence community himself when he finally retired, in the early years of his mentorship, he told me, he says, you've been watched and assessed since you were a child. He says, you and your sisters. He says, I'm developing you because your sisters just aren't, some of this stuff scares them. It doesn't scare you, and they're just not interested in it. He goes, you're the one I'm developing because you're the one that is the more curious one. But it was that comment that I had been assessed and observed and watched since childhood that then I, kind of started doing the math, realizing, well, was he referring to the MGM program? And then when this all came out and we learned that this was part of, is it Gate or Gateway?
Well, that's where the confusion comes in, because there's the GATE programs, there's the Monroe Institute Gateway programs, and then you have the Stargate program. And all of these things are very similar, and it's created a lot of confusion within people.
Yeah.
Hester here says also School of Parapsychology and with association with Duke University. That is correct. The government was funding studies to the Parapsychology Foundation in the 60s, along with Duke University. But that's where the confusion really starts, because if they are GATE programs, that is what it's been commonly referred to in schools as like the GATE programs.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, because me and Trey, we were watching a video, which I'm going to play some of the clips from the video here later on in our discussion here to maybe try and trigger some memory from you, the same video that me and Trey watched before. But there's a section in there that's triggering people. Okay, that's like triggering their memories. And it's this voice that supposedly these kids are putting on these headphones. They're going through a hearing test. And then a voice comes over the headphones and says, you should be hearing this in your right ear. If you're not hearing this in your right ear, turn your headphones around. Okay, which then brings into the dyslexic things that you were just kind of, talking about, right? But during my conversation with Trey, he says that he knows exactly where this clip of audio that's triggering people is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And he's right. He said that the audio is from the Monroe Institute Gateway programs. And then I'm like, okay, how are people remembering hearing the Monroe Institute Gateway Hemisync tapes in grade school or in public school, period? Okay. And then I'm like, all right, well, if we take the document that I just showed at face value, and SRI is trying to duplicate some of the experiments that the Chinese were doing on children, it would make sense that SRI would have a contract with like the government, and then they would also have a contract with the Monroe Institute as well, because we know it's verified in the documents that Army intelligence paid the Monroe Institute money to send their Army intelligence people to the Monroe Institute to study to see if it will help them with their psychic spy stuff. And several of the people that has been a part of that I've interviewed, like Lynn Buchanan, you've had Lynn Buchanan on as well. Dr. David Morehouse, he was on a roundtable with me, you, and Trey, and Dr. Paul Smith, and several of the people have talked about how the Gateway tapes were also at Fort Meade, Maryland, where they were doing their remote viewing and targeting the foreign assets, right, to get data information. So it seems like what has happened here is that SRI has done some sort of contract with the government to put these kinds of programs in schools to try and assess children, because it would be illegal for the government to run experiments on children, heavily illegal, especially if they were caught. Then it would be like they would be completely done. So the easiest way would be, in my mind, to wrap the experiments up into the public school system, right? Make it an educational thing and put it into the school system, and then tell the parents that they're being put into like this gifted program, which they probably were. They probably were smarter than a lot of people, because I've talked to a few people about this, and it was almost exactly like what you mentioned with like the reading level. I know someone personally that's not an influencer. They're not like a person that does podcasts or whatever. And someone that I know that's close to me said that they were in the gifted program, and it was because of their reading. It was because of their reading level. They were very young, and they had like a college grade reading level.
Yep.
And they were
my sisters. Yeah. And
so it seems like that's what's going on, is that there was some kind of contract between SRI, the Monroe Institute, and the government, and it was kind of put under this banner, and then it was put into the public school system as like a cover, because they couldn't do it just directly, send your kids in to get tested for psychic abilities, or be part of this gifted program, right? They had to use, like, they had to cover it in some kind of way, and the easiest way to do it was wrap it into the public school system.
I would like to know, of those of us who went through this, how many of us were the kids of U.S. military veterans? And I'll bet you'd find several of us. Like, I've written a book about my dad's weird stuff that went on with him during his Air Force career. And I'm wondering if that was their avenue, their loophole to do this with the kids. Remember, during the Cold War, it was all about everything for national security. And, I bet if I looked in the contract my dad signed, because when you go in the military, you're signing a contract. You sign you give Uncle Sam the right to jab you with test medicines and pharmaceuticals because you are a military member. Your constitutional rights are reduced when you go into the military active duty. And one of those things is you sign away to be a guinea pig on, pharmaceuticals. So, what else? What other loopholes might they have had? Well, Walter and his sisters, they're the children of, Staff Sergeant Bosley, who had this high clearance and worked in the early space program stuff. And, we got to keep an eye on them, because one of them might have the aptitude to, get in the fight, which I ended up doing for 20 years. But, you never know what kind of loophole as a kid of, a service member. I'm digging into that at kind of an angle on that in a rather famous case that I'm not going to talk about yet. But, I'm curious to know how many of the kids in the program had parents that had been in the military before them. It'd be interesting.
I would say parents that were in the military. I would also say that the school was besides some sort of research institute. I would say that if they didn't get into drugs and become an alcoholic in their life, because that was another thing that one of the people told me as well, is that they kind of got bullied for being in this gifted program because they were the only one, so it kind of wrecked
their socialization.
and then they got into other things. So I think that if they didn't the information didn't completely implode upon them and they didn't become drug addicts or alcoholics or whatever, then they were probably got involved into the military through that organization. So that's one of the things that Trey was putting together as we were doing the show. He was like, does this have something to do with my career path and like what
I think
direction
so.
am I winning?
I think it did with mine. We'll have to talk sometime. You're talking about Fort Meade and the Stargate program. We'll have to have a conversation sometime. But I learned years later that the language training program I was in for 11 months that should have been in Monterey, that's where the FBI always sends their people, we were sent to Fort Meade instead, and we were within visual of the Project Stargate building where they were doing that. And I found out years later from more than one source that we were training targets for remote viewers at Fort Meade. We were there just studying Russian, but there were some things that happened and some things. And one of my sources of confirmation, verification on that was Lynn Buchanan himself. So we'll have to talk about that. You might find that to be really interesting. But yeah, I think Trey is onto something with, look at his career path, look at my career path. Again, just like I asked the question, how many of us were the kids of veterans? How many of us went into military, and particularly military or civilian, intelligence, the intelligence community?
But then you also talk about this substance that people are, being asked to take or being made to take. There's been different explanations for what the substances are, depending on what school you went to and what part of the country you were in and where your school was. So, like with you, it was for your asthma.
That's what I was told. Yeah. And it's a little bit lighter of a yellow than inside my cup here. And that's all I know, that's what I was told. It was for an asthmatic condition, but it was as thick as Pepto-Bismol and it had kind of a weird aftertaste.
With
I took it for a year.
He was told that it was a vaccination. Other people were told that it was vitamins.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So they're using different excuses depending on where you are for the substances. And with the video that we're going to watch that's on this, other people remember it being like a thick drink, like a pink drink, like it's Pepto-Bismol. But that might be something that's like trying to get people off of the trail, and it might have been like yellow, like what you're saying.
You mentioned real quick the audio we're going to listen to about the Monroe Institute recording. If you hear, you should be hearing this in your, whatever ear. I do. That part seems familiar to me, as far as what ear I'm hearing it in. That part seems familiar to me, but the last sentence in there doesn't seem familiar to me. But anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't have the full Monroe Institute clip in there. That's just what's played afterwards. What's triggering everyone is like, you're hearing this voice in your right ear, and that's all that's in the video. But it goes on if you were to listen, because I went back and I listened to the full Monroe Institute tape to see what was said before it and what was said after it. And that's what was said after it, is that if you're not hearing this in your right ear, then turn your headphones around. But let's listen to this video, because it's I think that this may trigger some more thoughts and ideas about what exactly happened. And we're going to put the Fair Use banner up, because Fair Use Act disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. And this is covered under fair use because we are going to be commenting and educating the public on these school gate programs, and the clip is from the Shane Dawson YouTube channel. So here we go.
That brings me to the theory that you were talking to me about, and I was like, oh my God, save it for the podcast. We got a bunch of emails about this.
We're talking about the program,
Yes.
yeah? Are you familiar with the program in schools?
Yes, it was the weird, I remember like the weird test.
They're beeping out the gate program just because they don't want to be I guess they think that it might be some kind of legal issue or something. I don't know what they're but I think that they're saying gateway program again, which is another really confusing aspect to it.
Programs that have different names, but all of it was under the guise of the government is providing extra time to students that they think are more
equipped to succeed.
Yeah.
Well, there was the weird, I remember like the weird tests.
Yes. So they used to test us in the 90s, at least I remember being tested. They would do a bunch of weird tests. Sometimes they would even say that they were doing a hearing test or an eye test. And because I don't want to be sued, I'm scared now.
Just a theory.
Just a theory that when you put on those, and by the way, like, I don't know, can you still see like the hearing test? They'd take you to a portable that they like set up.
It's like a trailer.
Yeah, so you go into the portable, you sit down at a place, there's cards up so you can't see the person sitting next to you. There's like no windows around. They say sit into this little tiny cubicle that we've made, and there's like a box. It almost looks like a 1980s like plastic briefcase that's like a box.
Yeah.
And they put it down and you put on these like old ass like headphones, and then a voice comes on and it's like a man's voice from the 50s, and it says something like,
Do you remember a box?
Oh, I don't remember anything but that the headphones test happening. And I can remember my first grade class pretty vividly, but I remember going through that. I remember hearing the stuff, but I don't remember the details about exactly where I was sitting. So for what that's worth.
Was it removed from the school though, or did this happen inside of the school? Was it like a different building adjacent to the school?
My best recollection would be it happened in the school, but it might have been in another classroom, in another room, that kind of thing. When I was pulled outside of the class to read the list, that was literally right outside. They would have a desk set up, and a chair for the guy in the suit, and he would have his pre-printed papers, and he would put them in front of me, and he'd point to a particular, there were multiple lists of words, and he would point to the list, and he'd just tell me, read those words, and I would rattle through them. And yeah.
All right, let's continue.
all right, the voice you're about to hear is just in your right ear. Get ready for a hearing test made just for you.
You should be hearing my voice in your right ear.
That's what it is. That's the 2-second clip that's triggering all these people online. You should be hearing my voice in your right ear.
That's interesting. As long as he's not saying mine is the last voice that you will ever hear. That would freak me out. Yeah, I remember doing these tests with the headphones, but I don't remember that specific voice. But these were kids in the 90s, and that recording might have been after my time, because my last experience with what we're talking about, the overtly being pulled out of the class, was I finished 4th grade in going into the summer of 1973. So I started between 1967 and 1973 was when I was involved in this. So it's been a while.
Yeah, so yours was way earlier. Yeah, what people are being triggered about is like people from like the 90s, but I didn't get it because I didn't go to public school. I went to Christian school. So but there is something weird that did happen to me, like with the vision test and stuff, that I'll get into after we're done with the video.
They are saying this is not a hearing test. That is actually the beginning of a hypnosis.
What?
That is very famously used by a lot of people. So I'm going to butcher all of this a little bit, but when it came to the Cold War, that's like around that same time, this organization started, which was, I think was called the National Defense Education Act was created, which
I need to look more into that act. When did it? Was this?
Well, her comment about some people thinking it was a hypnosis thing. What the light that went on in my head was, well, is it something like that? Why I can't remember the details of the hearing test? I mean, I see the, I remember this guy. I remember his name, Mr. Cottrell. And this was one of the one I remember most that would pull me out of class. I went to Merle S. Casey Elementary School in Rialto, California, when this was going on, and then halfway through third grade, I moved to Foothill Elementary over in a community in Riverside called Arlington. But I can remember, Mr. Cottrell's name. I remember being pulled out of the class and reading the list. But when it comes to the hearing stuff, it's weird. It's just I know that I went through it. I just can't remember any details.
And that's that's the common problem with a lot of people that are remembering this, is that they cannot remember anything about it. They just remember that it happened. So it might be.
Well,
some
does
kind of
this
hypnosis,
National Defense Education Act, does it reveal something?
Well, that's what I need to look more into. I believe this is Eisenhower right here. So
Yeah.
Eisenhower had to have done this National Defense Education Act. I'll have to look more into it and actually read through the document and figure out exactly what it says. I think she's going to describe some of it, but I have not read it.
National Defense Education Act was created, which links education to national defense, which is weird. And
there you go.
From my perspective, the 20 years doing what I was doing and stuff I learned from my mentor, that's a big aha. People need to pay attention to what she said about this national defense, linking education to national security. Boom. That covers a lot of things they want to do, particularly during the Cold War. And remember, this was a good 15 or 16 years before they were caught doing the MK Ultra stuff.
Yep.
So 1958 is deep in the heart of the era of they've got a license to do this stuff. So from my perspective, that's a flag.
Yeah, MK Ultra was supposedly shut down in '83, and then it was revealed to the public in '85. So that was a good amount of time before. But
well, they got in trouble. Remember, the church committee in the mid '70s is where it really started to hey, you guys are doing funny stuff. What's going on? The church committee in 1974, 75.
Yeah. But I believe it started in '52, I believe. So they've been doing it for a while before they got caught and before it became an issue.
Right.
Continue here.
They started funding programs for gifted children around that time. Like when I was in elementary school, it was the early 90s. And my friend Haley actually I was in, which is a different thing, but it's because I didn't take the test seriously.
Okay, when did this... I don't know if I can figure it out.
Gifted children. See, the California program I was in, I was told when I was a kid or when I was younger that MGM, mentally gifted minds. There's the buzzword. Wow.
That's what the MGM program stands for, mentally gifted minds?
Yeah, MGM, mentally gifted mind. That's what I've known since I was a kid, that my sisters and I were part of. What's interesting is my one sister, I won't name her because it's sensitive stuff, but when she was a child, she suffered petit mal epilepsy. And I remember she was on a medicine to help control the petit mal, or small, grand mal is like the major epileptic where you have the overt seizure. Petit mal is the small seizure thing. And, some people have tied epilepsy to weird things having to do with psychic experiences and such. And she had to be on a medicine, these little orange pills called Zorantin, for, again, just a couple of years. Did she grow out of this? I mean, I don't know.
I'm trying to find the date of when Army intelligence sent their personnel to Robert Monroe. to do the gateway tapes. I believe that it was around. It's just off the top of my memory. It's in the document. It gives the exact date, but I believe it was around 72 or 71, 72, something like that. And when did this act come out? The 68? Is that when they said that that was the date on the
On the what? The act? No, the act was 1958, I think, because it was because it's September 2nd, 1958, because that's Eisenhower. He was, remember, Kennedy replaced him in the 60 election.
Okay, so this was in
beating
58.
Nixon.
They sent the Army intelligence people around 71, 72. They had to have been, they were definitely running these gifted programs before.
Oh, yeah.
So then that means that probably around mid 70s, early 80s is whenever they started incorporating the Monroe Institute gateway tapes into the public school system. I mean, that's just a rough guess, a rough estimate, because you don't remember them in school, but people in the 90s. So I would say,
well, I remember something, and there were voices in there. I just don't remember that specific voice. And I don't remember beyond something about, if you hear this in this ear, raise this hand, or you hear this in your, that thing. And standard sound, audio tests do that as well. But no, they were doing, I would say that maybe that specific recording they started to use in 82, but they were doing something like that years before that.
Yeah, well, I believe that the Monroe Institute gateway tapes has been around for a long ass time. I think since like the 50s, I believe, or like right around in there. Maybe right around this time. I'm trying to look it up really quickly. While I look it up, we'll continue listening to this.
But she doesn't remember much from the program at all. Because when I started, I was like, "You were in, right?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "Where was it?" She goes, "It was in like a small room off the library, I think, but like I don't really remember much about it." And that's the thing. Most kids don't remember very much about it.
I was in it.
What?
I think I was in it. There was the hearing test.
Yeah.
There was a weird like flashcard test.
Yeah.
Where it was like, you're predicting the car.
Yes.
Predicting the fucking car.
Okay, you might have been in, because this is something that all the kids remember. So they would do
And they gave me a nerd rope.
Everybody talks about the ropes and the different colored ropes. You're supposed to, oh my God, you're like, literally my nipples are so.
That Trey also says something about that he remembers doing a test with ropes.
I don't recall the ropes. I don't recall the ropes. I remember flashcards, but I don't remember it being that classic predict the shape thing. That didn't make my nipples hard, so I must not have remembered it.
You can only remember it if your nipples get rock hard.
Right? Yeah.
That's that tingle. That's that tingle that people get. It makes your nipples hard.
We're awful.
But I do have a weird thing with flashcards that I was talking to you about before. Whenever I was really young, I like experienced like entities like coming out of the walls. That might sound crazy to you, whatever.
Nope.
Crazy to people that is listening. But whenever I was young, every single night, entities would come out of the walls and surround me around my bed. And I told my parents about it, and they thought something was wrong with my eyes. They thought something was wrong with my vision. And they took me to the doctor at the hospital, and the doctor gave me these flashcards that were like no bigger than like a business card, like a standard business card. And I had these bullseyes on it, and there were like, I don't know, 4 or 5 circles within it. And then there was like the bullseye in the center, and there was 3 of them. And they kind of, there was 3 sections of bullseyes. And he said, "Can you make these like pop up off of the flashcard? Can you turn these bullseyes
red?"
Yeah, they were red. That's exactly right. They were red.
Oh, yeah. I remember we talked about this. I still experience this a little bit, but if there's red printing on something, I'll look at it and it's off the paper.
Yeah,
kind of like off the paper in multi-dimensional. So you were experiencing cards, that had red colored targets,
Yes, red colored bullseyes.
bullseyes, and they
Yeah,
extended
like,
off the page.
yes,
Oh, wow.
yes. He said,
Yeah.
"Can you make these bullseyes like become 3D and come up off of the page?" And I was like,
I
can
still
do
do
it.
that. Does that still happen to you?
I can do it. I can do it on command.
Yeah. You were probably good at those magic eye things in the 90s too, right?
What were
Once
those?
your eye locks in, you see the 3D image emerge off the page. You remember those? They're called magic eye.
No, I'm not familiar with.
You were probably a little kid when they came out because my son was real young and he was born in 90. Yeah, look it up. Magic eye. This is the phenomenon that makes that work is what Seshari, my associate, thinks happened to me when I saw the image of Athena on the side of a mountain, that I was standing just in the right place at the right time and focused just right. And it was like burned on the side of the mountain, but it just kind of emerged with more contrast, and I don't know how to describe it, but he thinks it's this magic eye thing. And it makes me wonder now who really first put those magic eye things out in the 90s, right? I mean, did they put those out as kind of a tester or a way for people to practice being able to, like you were told, make it 3D, make it jump off the page? I don't know. It was a novelty item, when it was out, but it's one of the most intriguing novelty items I've ever seen.
Okay, yeah, I do remember these magic eyes. I do remember seeing these. I'm looking it up on Google right now. Yeah, there's a lot of really strange ones, but yeah, I would definitely. I'm looking at them right now. Yeah.
Makes me wonder if maybe the person who came up with that as the novelty had some connection to someone who was involved in those cards, right? Maybe the Monroe. It'd be interesting to find out if the person who created the fun magic eye stuff, if they had some connection to the Monroe Institute. Stranger things have happened.
Yes, and he gave me these cards, and he said, "Come back and visit me when you can make all of them pop up off of the card." So then I went back home and I practiced because I could do like the first one, but I couldn't do the second one or the third one. The first one, they got more like in focus as they went. So the first one was like really blurry,
Uh-huh.
right? And then the second one was less blurry, and then the third one was like really pronounced and like
It's the comeback when you can make them all jump comment that to me is really significant. That was somebody recognized that as a gift or a skill that they wanted you to develop.
That's exactly what I thought, and I never went back. My parents never took me back, even though I told them. I was like, "Hey, I can do it now. I figured it out."
So you were able to do it, but they never took you back?
Right.
Oh, that's too bad. That would have been interesting to see what would have happened next.
That would have been really interesting. Really, really interesting. But he was keen, aware enough to not say that, I was crazy or that I was out of my mind or I was
Because he knew you weren't.
Yeah, exactly. He had to have known, and that's just my experience with the flashcards because they're bringing up the flashcards and predicting things, but that's the only thing that I'm aware of that happened to me with flashcards in my
Interesting.
childhood was with this doctor asking if I can make the things on the card like 3D, and I can do it. I'll have to try and replicate it and like make it through like Photoshop or editing tools so I can get a physical representation of it for people to see exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, I can do it to this day. Like I can turn things into like I can split things in like two. Like I can make it like an alternative version of like whatever it is that I want to see. Like sometimes like I can have the TV like separate and the TV will just like float up the wall like a duplicate of the TV and
Yeah.
might be going crazy. Might be getting
No,
off the deep end there, but I can do it.
it's not
But I can
crazy.
do it on command and it doesn't happen if I don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, let's continue.
hard right now. Freak the fuck out. Do you also feel like you've had do you have reoccurring dreams where you feel
I
like
can't do this right now. Okay, keep going.
do you want me to leave you
No,
alone?
keep going,
Okay,
keep
because it's
going,
scaring me.
'cause it's
Do you
freaking
have
me
like
out.
reoccurring dreams where you feel like you're like to some degree they're predictive of the future and then something happens
Oh,
that you
Jesus.
all the fucking time. My life is that. I
Oh my-
literally
can you see my
with
nipples?
Yeah. Yeah, that happened to me very specifically, most vividly on a Saturday, early Saturday evening in January of 1981. I had, and I have vivid dreams. I had the most vivid dream of my life that I can still remember the details of, and parts of that dream came true. I found myself in those places, specifically in that dream, came true for well over 20 some years, 20 to 30 years or more. And that has, I wouldn't say it's haunted me, but it's been something that it's just there. I would find myself the first time I went to Germany, was 17, 18 years or so, somewhere in there. It was 97. I go to Rudesheim. I never been to Germany. I never been to Rudesheim, Germany. I turn a corner and there I am, and it just comes back extremely vivid. This was in that friggin' dream I had in January of 81. I mean, specific things. And anyway, for what that's worth. I know there's people out there going, oh, he's telling stories. And, I don't know what to say to those people who just are, they have the certainty fetish. If they're not certain themselves, then everybody's bullshitting. I understand that's how this sounds, but the predictive dreaming, and that wasn't the only time that's happened, but that has been the most vivid time. And I asked my mentor years later, I said, what was that dream? What happened to me? And what he told me was, you were shown several years ahead of your life. And he said, at some point it'll happen again. And I just remember him telling me, I'm like, what the hell? By this time I think I was FBI or the Air Force at the time. I'm like, what do you mean I was shown several years? What the hell? What does that imply? But yeah, that's been my experience with that. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
That's really important. It's really important. Del Graff, which was the operations manager of the Stargate remote viewing unit, the guy that actually coined the term Stargate, has wrote a book on like dreams and like how like predictive dreams and like all that. I've had him on a couple of times. You should maybe try and get in contact with him and bring him on your show. He's done a whole, he's talked about it several times on my show. And he thinks that is linked to like psychic abilities.
Yeah. I have since come to think, I hate to use the word believe because I've thought this through. He also said to me, you will understand that dream and what happened to you in that dream and what happened to you, in December of 79 when I had my weird enlightenment experience. He told me in the mid 90s that I would figure out what it is I had done that was the result of. And, that's a whole other discussion. I think I have, and I got a kind of confirmation from him before he died as to what I think explained the being shown however many years ahead of my life. And it's all part of my weird story. But what's interesting is in the context of what we're talking about here, how this, is showing up. But go ahead. I don't want to digress.
No, that's really important because I think that it's all connected. It's definitely all connected. I mean, the programs being tested for like having flashcard text, predictive text, the taking the substance, the psychic experiments, the Monroe Institute gateway tapes, predictive dreams, the Stargate program. It's all one big. It's connected, I believe.
We were
100%
specimens. We were specimens. Specimens for study and then development in some cases.
All right, let's continue this video because there's more that they talk about here.
With Ben, I've had all these weird moments, and then the next day I meet them, and this is crazy. Keep going.
Okay, so did they give you a tiny, like a weird little pink drink? Do you remember getting a little pink drink?
I thought that
This is the pink drink stuff.
was to test my blood sugar.
No.
He said that was test your blood sugar.
Yeah.
So everybody literally, like, can you see my nipples?
What is going on?
Everybody in the program remembers getting a little pink drink, and after that pink drink they don't remember much else until something like this happens and there's an exchange, and they're like, no, I remember this, and I remember the weird shapes, and they would show me these cards and they'd want me to know what was on the next card before I saw the card, so I was like predicting what was on the card, and they would put something in a box and I'd have to know what was in the box, and they'd make me wear 3D glasses, like one red eye, one blue eye, and yeah. So all of that, they believe, the theory says, is an educational program that's inspired by or directly linked to the MK Ultra program. And that
Yes.
I remember, and I haven't been able to find it yet. Maybe someone can find it, but I haven't been able to find it yet. But I remember around 1970 or 71, my dad brought home this little block about the size of a Rubik's Cube, but it wasn't on hinges. It was different shapes. And if it was in a square, a cube, and you could take it apart, but you had to figure out how to put it back together. And he brought it home one day. I do not recall where he said he got it from. And it was around the house, and, we'd fidget with it. And I remember figuring out how to do it. My sisters did too. But now it's like everything's on the table. It's like, okay, my dad, the guy who had been in the Air Force, had been in the weird stuff that happened to him. He's the one that comes home with this thing. Did they give it to him and say, give this to your kids as kind of another tester? I don't know. But if somebody can find that, they were plastic and it was these different shapes that would all fit together in a cube about the size of a Rubik's Cube. And maybe it was just a common game toy thing back then, but I'm within the context. I have to wonder.
This is so strange because if that is true, what she just said right there, that they were trying to have these kids predict the next flashcard, they would put something in a box, tell them what's inside of the box. That's the type of experiments that SRI was doing whenever they first got the contract with the government in 1972 with their remote viewers.
Has anybody taken freeze framed on that video and zoomed into those bottles that had the pink stuff in it to read the labels?
I don't think that was an actual. I think that was just like a visual representation of what was going on. I don't think that was a real photo. But that is crazy. If that is true, that they're doing this in school, Lynn Buchanan will tell you that that's what sometimes that they would do. That they would put. That's how they tested some of the remote viewers. Is they would put something into an envelope. And then they would have they would ask the question, what's inside of the envelope? What number is inside of the envelope?
Yeah.
Insanity. So that also confirms that either SRI was directly involved or they indirectly involved. They gave this information to the government and the government put it in there. Or like in the document that I brought up in the very beginning of the show, they were involved with experimentations on children. SRI was directly involved in these public school gifted programs.
Because the things that we're talking about that we all experienced, it sounds like this passive type of testing, right? That sounds like something that SRI was one of those organizations that was kind of their forte, to come up with what appears to be an innocuous activity, but can tell them a lot. It's telling them more than we're able to guess they're trying to do. I mean, I
And
think
then
it's
speaking of MK Ultra, there are several MK Ultra sub projects out of the 149 sub projects, which you already know this, Walter, but that was directed for figuring out psychic abilities.
Mm-hmm.
ESP.
Yeah.
Was a part of the MK Ultra programs. That's what got me interested in this entire topic from the jump, was reading through the MK Ultra declassified projects and realizing that there were sub projects that was related to the development of psychic abilities. And when you look at trauma,
well,
trauma works, and when people are traumatized, they're emotionally traumatized, it normally heightens
weird things can
their
happen.
senses.
Well, and again, the certainty fetish people, the poo-pooers, debunkers, they like to say, well, look, this general over here wrote a memo that said, this isn't worth anything, nothing comes of this, or how easy when you hit pay dirt, okay, and you want to clamp a lid on something, okay, you know how easy it is for the first step in clamping a lid is, okay, generate a document that says there's nothing to this, keep moving people. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to this remote viewing. I mean, they can do that. And could it be total BS? Absolutely. It can be total BS, but if it's within the mandate of protecting something, look at anti-grav research. Anti-gravity research was a very open source thing that was being pursued through the 1950s. And then suddenly in 1958, no more talk about it in popular mechanics and things like that. No more public discussion. And then beyond that, anybody who did talk about it, they're a kook. We looked into that and there's nothing to it. Well, BS. Most people think that the breakthrough was made in 1958, or some level of breakthrough. So they clamped a lid on it. And of course, you want to control the narrative with perception management. So the famous, not Stubblebine, but the other general who said, there's nothing to this remote viewing thing, this is done. I question that. I think it might have been that it was quite the opposite. And they decided, okay, we need to clamp a tighter lid down on this. So let's generate there's nothing to this, we're going to stop it. And then we just, the Army stopped it. So what they do is they just farm it out to another entity, which is very similar to UFO stuff. The government can honestly say with, culpable deniability, we're not storing any captured flying saucers or anything like that. Well, because they learned long ago that private corporations, their proprietary material, they're not bound by US law to share that with the public at all, ever. So they figured out, let's start a contract company, that's going to be the custodian of this stuff, so that we, Uncle Sam, can be honest and say, we don't have a flying saucer. But the shell contractor that they created to house the stuff so they can still have access to it, to study it, they're the ones who are holding it, and they don't have to admit it. There's no law that says a private corporation, even if contracted by the government, has to reveal any of those kinds of secrets. So I've said for years, stop stomping your foot at the U.S. government and the Air Force to tell you the UFO secrets, and start demanding and putting the heat on the corporations, the contractors who are probably the custodians. So just like in that situation, remote viewing probably got, they play the shell game. It probably got moved over here. So sure, the Army, they stopped it because it's just not sensible, good Army stuff. But move it somewhere else, move it to a different branch, or move it to a different department of the government. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
Like the NSA. That's
the
where I think.
NSA or wherever.
Well, Sam brings up the 3D glasses statement here. He says the blue and red 3D glasses as well around the same time in the same program, probably.
Hmm.
What does 3D glasses do, right? It makes things 3D. So
Yeah.
could they be testing their vision to get them used to doing this magic eye thing? Okay.
Or so they're not startled, so that they're not startled when it happens naturally, perhaps.
There you go. That was probably the reason for, because if you were to put 3D glasses on and you weren't doing the magic eye thing, the bullseyes would pop up because they're blurred. Oh my God, Walter. Oh my God. That's why they were blurred.
So that they would pop easier.
And then they got clearer. So the advanced form of the third bullseye is the most clearest. So if you weren't doing the magic eye thing and you put 3D glasses on, they would automatically pop up off of the.
Yeah, like the glasses might have been for those who couldn't do it naturally.
Yes. To try and train them to get them to the point that they could do it without the glasses.
To bring them up.
Oh my God.
There you go. And I'm sorry, the people that are gonna, debunk and naysay it and be all negative. It's like, I can't help you. It's just not something that you're going to be open to. But when you've got traces and hints and documents and stuff that show that certainly the U.S. government, the intelligence community, the national defense community was digging into this stuff, was pursuing this stuff, you can't just write it off as all fantasy. There's something to this. There's something to all of this that we're talking about, something legit. Otherwise they wouldn't have been fooling with it if there wasn't something.
That makes so much sense. So much sense. And I wouldn't have been able to put that together if I didn't have that doctor give me that flashcard.
Yeah.
Wow. But that's a whole other thing too that we could probably do a whole other show on, which is the UFOs. And people have claimed that, I forget who it was. It was one of the approved people to talk about UFOs in Congress and all that. One of these people, Dave Grush or Jeremy Corbell, or one of them, one of the other approved people, James Fox maybe, that was talking about how they would use remote viewers to control the unmanned UFO craft. Right, where they would connect their minds on Earth to the craft and be able to remotely pilot the craft with their mind.
Interesting. Right?
That is a whole other rabbit hole.
And notice how we get into the 90s, and then that's when it emerges that, the Roswell aliens were controlling their craft with their mind, and that seems to coincide with, after years of doing this mind sciences research and remote viewing stuff, that, now let's lay that onto the Roswell thing, right? Which, me, I'm long convinced that Roswell had not a damned thing to do with extraterrestrials. And anytime I get these angry debaters, this guy doesn't know any of the information, all the information that they cite about the ET hypothesis was disproven years ago, or proven to be lies and stuff, but they're newbies and they're believing the old stuff. I think with Colonel Corso, in particular, I think stuff that we were developing on our own was through the years attached to, we got it from the Roswell craft. We got it from the Roswell aliens, because we want to keep it secret that this is just very human developed, Earth developed, in our case, US government developed stuff, and It's like they created this Roswell ET myth as their catch-all for, oh, we couldn't develop this on our own. It was a gift, an unintended gift from the Roswell alien crash, and there's enough people that want to believe that it was ET that you're not going to convince them otherwise. But the clue to the key that the people that are most vehement about that, they're almost religious in their devotion to it, is the anger. When you throw something at somebody that really shakes the foundations of their inner beliefs and their faiths in whatever it is, it's a very human response to get angry because you're throwing an existential threat at them, and the Roswell ET folks, devotees, they get that way. So anyway, that's another aside. Sorry.
No, I'm in a complete agreement with you and your research. I share your same belief about the Roswell crash. It's more likely that it was a test flight for the very first space operations that they were doing after World War II, and it got out of hand and crashed, and then they had to
something went wrong,
cover it up, and then it became a really big phenomenon in 1980. No one talked about it, no one cared about it until 1980, and that book came out by what's his name, the big UFO researcher that came out and said that it was all made up garbage.
Bill Moore, right?
William Moore. Yep, that's what made Roswell take off in the zeitgeist of ufology. Literally nobody cared about it before then. All right, let's continue this video.
MK Ultra program was when they were fucking around with mind control and psychedelic drugs and like the men who talk to goats shit. And also I would say Stranger Things, because
men who stare at goats, but I'll give her a pat.
All of this sounds a lot like what happened to 11. Everybody who was in the, not everybody, but like most people I've spoken to don't remember a thing about it. They have all those things that you remember. They think that was the hearing and seeing tests in school.
And so what was their goal? What did they want to prep these kids for?
They wanted to prep these kids to start learning how to, which you fucking later did in a video.
What?
Astral projection.
Yes, 100%.
Astral projection, and that thing that you did where he guessed Cheesecake Factory.
Remote
viewing. Yes. So all of the kids that they were
throw up.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I was thinking about that on the way over here.
So stressed.
And so the point was, because they were worried about all these things going on, like this was the educational defense system that they were putting together, because kids have like a thinner veil and are more open and more suggestible. And the extension of this, where it becomes a little cuckoo nuts, is
where it becomes.
This does get a little cuckoo but not out of the realm of possibility.
Well, so like honestly, like I'm with the theory to this point, because I know that the government does weird stuff, and I know that they get like creative about things. Like there's a bunch of private companies that their sole existence is to be creative and come up with weird weapons, like different weapons development things. Like that's their sole function and purpose. So of course someone's going to think like, oh, let's tap into the next generation.
Yeah.
The step further is that they believe that these kids were specifically being taught how to communicate with aliens.
Oh my God, Jared, I have talked about
the theory. Don't know, possibly, but Trey in the video said that he had an encounter with an entity when he was growing up, and he had a drawing of it.
Cool.
He had a drawing of it, Walter. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's, and Trey's a level-headed guy. When someone like that, I didn't have my UFO experience till 2014. And I've been into this stuff all my life, but I didn't have my bona fide UFO experience till, I was, 51, I think. Yeah. Have you seen the drawing of the?
Yeah, he showed the drawing on our show.
Oh, okay. I got to finish watching that then. Okay.
Yeah, he showed the drawing of the gray alien that he saw when he was a kid.
Okay.
And that kind of struck a chord with me as well, because my family also seen really strange things that I was informed about whenever I was older.
And you were in West Virginia too, right?
Yes.
We both know that place is a friggin' doorway.
Yep. Really strange, really weird. My family, my dad specifically, seen very strange things while he was growing up. I wasn't informed of it until I was around 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
Weird
Yeah,
stuff, like entities and craft and like, I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think about it. It's
well,
weird.
I think there's some. I hate that it's the only term we got, but that's why I prefer to call them the Tuatha Dé Danann. But you know, those others that emerge in fairy lore, so to speak, those interdimensionals. You know, Jacques Vallée, before he sold out to the ET hypothesis people, his research was going. What he was finding was more and more interdimensional beings, and the Tuatha Dé Danann specifically, he had identified, and yet nobody wanted to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. Just like Joshua Cutchin in his what's it called, the Ecology of Souls or something. His incredible work connecting death and the realm of the dead with UFOs. And, you know, he's written a thick, I think it's titled The Ecology of Souls, but thick work, and it's 2 volumes. You know, he was intrigued with the question that Anne Strieber had said, brought up to Whitley, where her comment, before she passed was, I think this UFO thing has something to do with the dead. And, that when I first heard that, I found that intriguing as hell. And Joshua Cutchin really has done a deep dive and written this amazing book, on that theme of there's something interdimensional connected with this UFO stuff. And I certainly think that has to do with what we're talking about, the weirdness in West Virginia, Woody Dernberger, Indrid Cold, Mothman, but that's just the stuff people have heard about. There's
Flatwoods Monster.
Yeah, Flatwoods Monster and all of that. It's a weird. That area is just one of those weird doorway areas.
Yep, very strange.
This experience on the podcast before and in real life. When I was really young and I saw 3 gray aliens outside of our bedroom window, I was on the top bunk and it like scarred me for life. And Mom told me they were guardian angels and I freaked the fuck out.
Oh my God, you have shared that on this podcast.
I'm going to cry.
Wait,
what the
because
fuck is wrong with me, Lindsay?
literally a lot of the kids also, like, that's another one of the
How many
traits.
times have, not to make this about
And they
me,
say gray aliens.
but Spencer, how many times have I said, I think aliens are going to contact me. We need to get a camera.
Yeah,
I've been like, that's going to happen and we're going to fucking film that shit.
That's so crazy.
I have chills
I'm
all
gonna
over my body.
throw
Aliens are coming. They're coming to get me. Whip out the camera. No one ever has a camera on them whenever they're about to see the aliens, though.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
so stressed your cat had to come.
Do I need to leave you like the dress needs to leave us? I don't want to be around for the aliens.
But yeah, so
Oh,
that's
hey.
the thought. The thought is that they were teaching them.
With my UFO encounter, I did have presence of mind to run in the house and get the camera, and I got it on video. But I say we because there was another witness with me. We both realized that what we were seeing with our eyes, the camera did not capture. And that people have reported that all the camera captures is, this light doing something weird, and the stuff that the glowing stuff, I call it hot stuff, glowing stuff that was spilling over the edge. But we were seeing it looked much closer, and we were seeing greater detail. I had to do a drawing and sketch, but I did have the presence of mind to run get my camera, and it stayed there like it was waiting for me to get my camera and before it started moving again.
That's weird. Really weird.
How to astral project into like conference rooms with aliens.
Are the aliens going to be nice?
Ask him. It seems like he knows.
Well, I'm just trying to decide if I
I'm
can be
like
around
so
for this.
obsessed weirdly into aliens.
Yeah.
This is so weird.
Well, and I asked another friend of mine because her husband was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I was abducted as a child. And I was like, I hit her up and I was like, yo, was your husband in the program too? He wasn't.
I wonder, what if that's why you're so into this genre of thing? Conspiracy,
This is too
extraordinary.
much. This is the weirdest day of my life.
There might be something to that as well.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is the thing that all these people have in common, myself, you, Trey, is look at the common other weird experiences that this has seemed to lead to, or seem to have been a part of it all along. I mean, did they select certain kids because they already knew we were being exposed, or we were having these strange encounters with these others? Were they the source of these encounters? Were they projecting things to us? These are the questions that arise, but it's interesting how the people that as kids went through this also have these very strange, weird things that happen. So you ask, did they know that about us? Or did it happen because we had a certain aptitude that they spiked development in?
Could be
Again, we were specimens.
Could be the combo of the both. It could be both of those things simultaneously. I mean, I think that it's not out of the realm of possibility, like what you were mentioning before, that you were kind of, looked at your whole life, like they were keeping track of what
That's
you were
what he
doing,
told me.
where you were going, what was going on in your life, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but there's been several people that have made, similar comments to that they had found out that they had been, kind of surveilled.
Yeah.
Their whole life. Do you want to see my UFO video?
Yes.
Okay, so this was filmed in the backyard of a house in Colorado through military-grade night vision goggles. I've showed this on the show a couple of times, but this is 100% real footage. I seen it as I was recording it. And
that's it there with kind of the dim outline of light.
Yep. It's a boomerang. It's a flying giant boomerang, or a flying backwards L.
That's cool.
And
I'll bet, let me ask you this. Were you able to see it you said you did this through night vision goggles. Were you able to see it with the naked eye?
I didn't want to put the night vision goggles down because it was being filmed through the night vision goggles.
Oh, I see. Okay. Because I was just going to ask if you were able to see more details more clearly than the video captured. Some people say that these things have a way of kind of jamming the signal or murking up the visual so they can't be recorded easily.
Yeah, it was really strange. And I seen it and I was tracking it and I was telling everybody about it, and they looked, but they didn't see anything in the sky with their naked eye. But I wasn't about to put down the night vision goggles to
yeah, because you're seeing it that way, right?
Yeah. I've shown that a few times and seems like nobody cares, but I think that it was
that's really cool. I'll send you a copy of mine. You can take a look at it. I have a video on my channel at YouTube, Walter Bosley channel, that is essentially the presentation I gave at Contact in the Desert in 2021, the online conference during all that quarantine nonsense. And I tell, all the details about it. And I even showed the pictures, and I think a little snippet of the video in that. But yeah, I'll send you a link to that, and you can see that. But that's a cool video that you got there. And there were no flashing lights on it, no FAA required marker lights or anything.
No flashing lights on it. It just cruises through the sky. It's not a bird. It's not flapping. There's nothing flapping on it. So I
Wow.
don't know. I don't know what it is. I've had it for, I don't know, 3 years now. But yeah. Um so to kind of wrap up our topic here,
Mhm.
and I know that it's a loaded question, but what do you personally believe, all the things that we've listened to today, out of all the things that we've talked about, I think that it's without a shadow of a doubt, this was definitely happening in public schools. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yes. This
Now,
was an assessment by somebody in the National Defense Intelligence community, to put it simply.
and what do you believe? We heard a few theories there: aliens, remote viewing, psychics, ESP, dreams. We talked about, intelligence, getting people ready for the military or a certain career path that they want to
Mhm.
shepherd them into.
Yeah.
What do you believe was the purpose, as a former FBI agent and former Air Force special investigator? What do you believe that these programs were designed for?
In my particular case, from my perspective, I think it had everything to do with why my uncle developed me and recruited me into what he did. You have to remember, I think I mentioned this to you before, I'm still not sure exactly what he got me involved with, because while I was working for the FBI, I was still, off duty on a particular day each week. I would call him. Now, this was before cell phones. It was on a payphone most of the time, but I was supposed to go call him and report in, and, we'd chat and talk. And then I would go see him. And this was outside of my FBI duties. Um, and then when I was in the Air Force, the same thing. When I was in officer training school, he would show up on base, and because I'd called him on the phone, he'd say, "Be over at the BX, I'll be there." And I would have private meetings with him. And technically I was a trainee and I didn't have privileges to go to the BX and meet him in his truck and have these conversations. I was technically not supposed to be doing that, but he told me to do it, and I never got in trouble for it. But he would fill me in on people in my training group, who to watch out for, who to trust, things like that. And then even after I left the Air Force, who I was working for after that, he had even more involvement with that. So basically what I'm saying is all through those years, I was essentially reporting to him no matter who I worked for. I had my duties, in the duty day as an agent or as a FBI counterintelligence operative, working for my supervisors and stuff like that. But it was understood that I was reporting to him, and I was being developed and trained to be part of something else that was extracurricular to FBI, Air Force, and the other guys I worked for. So, and I still that was never revealed, because he had a medical issue, a stroke, had to retire earlier than expected, and that kind of messed up his mentorship. you know um, so he never finally told me. But remember, this is the guy that taught me how to do necromancy and encouraged all this psychic stuff. And he told me all along, he says, there are people expecting you to know how to do this. Flat out, there are people expecting you to know how to do this. And he even told me that he said, I'm your mentor, but you have a sponsor. And he named my sponsor. My sponsor was, years ago, a very well-known congressman, a United States senator. I've never revealed that name. But if I'll tell you off air, and you'll know the name. And I said to him, I go, really? That guy knows I exist? And he kind of laughed. He goes, yeah. He's not always happy about it when you step on your dick, as they used to say in the military. We laughed, but he said, I'm your mentor. He's your sponsor. And I said, sponsor into what? He goes, you don't need to know that yet. So you know, when he passed away, I, left. There's still some murk and mystery there. I have my ideas based on research and things, but that's a for what it's worth thing. Anyway, I digress.
Sorry, I was muted. I think that a lot of the stuff is connected. It's obviously connected. There's a lot of things there to dive into, and I'm going to get into it in this new documentary. I'm adding a lot of the stuff in there, and I think it's going to be a really big eye opener and a big shocker to a lot of people. Walter, thanks so much for coming on, brother. Really appreciate it. Can you let people know where to find you online? I have your website linked in the description of the video, so anybody that's interested, they can find a lot of your stuff through your website, right?
Yeah, walterbosley.com. That's where you go to get my books. Also, we just we're having an event, big, fun, interesting event in Big Bear, California, in November, and you can find the links and the description of that at walterbosley.com, but I can also be found at the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube.
Awesome. Thanks everyone in the chat. Really appreciate you. All of my links are also in the description, and also the link to Walter's website is in the description. If you guys are interested in on more what's going on with Walter, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel on the algorithm, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications, and we will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.